She walked into that office every morning for 3 years, preparing all the reports, creating all the spreadsheets, staying late when everyone else had already left. Deja Calloway, a radiant and beautiful Black woman, was the unseen engine behind one of the most powerful organizations on the East Coast. And then, one Monday morning, her world crumbled with a single whispered phrase. The head of the Korean Mafia, Kang Jae-won, a man with dragon tattoos climbing up his neck and $400 million built on loyalty and fear, decided that her dark skin brought bad luck. That her presence in the room during negotiations with his partners in Seoul sent the wrong signal. That she, the woman who knew every number in every file on every floor of that building, needed to be removed. Not fired, relocated to the basement.
Second basement, where the lights buzzed, the air was stale, and the documents faded into oblivion. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She grabbed her notebook, pressed the elevator button, and went down. But what Kang Jae-won never imagined, what no one in that glass tower, 34 floors above her, could have predicted, was what Deja was about to find in those boxes, and what she decided to do with it. Because sometimes, the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one with tattoos and an empire. Sometimes it's the one you sent to the basement, and who came back thirsty for revenge. Before we begin the story, comment here where you're watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click Become a Member to join and support our channel. The 34th floor of the Kang Group International building had a particular quality of silence that Deja Calloway had learned to read like weather. Some silences meant nothing. Some meant that Kang Jae-won had already made a decision and was simply waiting for the world to catch up to it. This silence, on a gray Monday morning in October, meant something she had not encountered before. She walked in holding the quarterly report binder, the same report she had compiled herself while the senior analyst recovered from surgery. The same report she had cross-referenced against 3 separate ledgers at 2 in the morning. The same report that contained, buried on page 47, a discrepancy of $11 million that she had flagged in red and annotated with a question mark she expected someone to address. Nobody had addressed it. She set the binder on the conference table the way she always did, precisely 2 inches from the edge, aligned with the leather border. She had done this for 3 years. She had done it so many times that her hands moved without instruction from her mind. Mrs. Park appeared at her elbow before she could reach her chair. Mrs. Park, who had worked for the Kang family for longer than Deja had been alive. Mrs. Park, who spoke 4 languages and wore the same pearl earrings every single day. Mrs. Park, whose face at that moment carried an expression Deja had never seen on it. Something between shame and the particular exhaustion of someone delivering a message they did not choose to carry. "He has asked that you not attend the meeting," Mrs. Park said. Her voice was barely above the ambient hum of the building's ventilation system. "Or any meetings this week." Deja looked at her. "I prepared that report." "I know." "The cell partners are reviewing figures I built." "I know." Mrs. Park looked at the middle distance, somewhere past Deja's shoulder, past the floor-to-ceiling windows, past the city itself. "He believes that dark skin is bad luck during important negotiations, that it sends the wrong signal to the partners arriving tomorrow. He wants you relocated to the archive floor, sub-level 2. The words landed the way heavy things land, not with noise, but with weight. The kind that presses down slowly and keeps pressing. Deja did not raise her voice. She had learned very early in her life that raising her voice in rooms like this one only ever confirmed what people in rooms like this one already believed about women who looked like her. She had learned to make her stillness the loudest thing about her. Temporarily, Mrs. Park added. The word clearly cost her something. Of course, Deja said. She picked up her notebook. She walked to the elevator. She pressed sub-level 2. The archive room smelled like old paper and recycled air and the particular staleness of things that nobody had looked at in a long time. The fluorescent lights hummed at a frequency that felt, after the first hour, like it was coming from inside her own skull. There were no windows. There was a metal desk, a chair with a wheel that dragged slightly to the left, and approximately 4 decades of the Kang Group's physical documentation stacked in gray boxes along every wall. She sat down. She opened the first box. And because Deja Calloway was, above every other thing she was, someone who worked, she began to read. What she was looking for, in those first hours, was nothing specific. She was simply doing what she always did when the world handed her something she could not control. She found the thing she could do, and she did it completely. But the document she pulled from the third box on the second shelf changed the direction of everything. She read it once, then again, then a third time, very slowly, the way you read something when part of you is hoping you misunderstood. She had not misunderstood. She set the page flat on the metal desk. She placed her hands on either side of it. The fluorescent light hummed above her. Somewhere on the 34th floor, the men who had sent her here were shaking hands with partners from Seoul and speaking about trust and loyalty and the integrity of the organization. Deja looked at the document for a long time. Then she reached for the next box. The document was not dramatic in appearance. That was the first thing that struck her about it. How ordinary it looked. A wire transfer summary. A registration certificate for a holding company. A name she had seen before, buried inside footnotes of quarterly reports she had filed without question for 3 years. Deja Capital, Cayman Islands, existing 2019. She had assumed, the 2 times she had noticed it before, that it was a dormant investment vehicle, the kind of paper structure that corporations created and forgot about. She had never had reason to look closer. Nobody had asked her to look closer. Her job had been to organize, to compile, to present, not to investigate. But now she had nothing but time and fluorescent light and 4 decades of paper, and the particular clarity of mind that comes to a person who has just been humiliated and has chosen, deliberately, not to fall apart. She pulled every document that referenced Deja Capital. There were more than she expected, far more. She spread them across the metal desk in chronological order, the way she had been taught to organize evidence during the 1 semester of paralegal coursework she had taken before the money ran out and she had needed a real job immediately. The pattern emerged the way patterns always emerge, not all at once, but in accumulation. A percentage point here, a routing number repeated, a signature on a disbursement form that appeared on too many documents for someone whose name appeared nowhere on any official organizational chart. Marcus Hale, Chief Financial Officer. 7 years with the Kang Group. A man who brought his own coffee every morning in a thermos that said, "World's okayest golfer," and who laughed too loudly at his own jokes in a way that people had always found either charming or exhausting, depending on how much they needed something from him. Deja had needed nothing from Marcus Hale. She had therefore always found him exhausting. She looked at his signature on 14 separate disbursement authorizations and understood, with the cold precision of someone who had spent 3 years making sure numbers told the truth, exactly what he had been doing. The Seoul partners were being robbed, not by Kang Jae-won, by the man Kang Jae-won trusted most completely, in the way that powerful people sometimes trust the people directly beneath them, not because they have verified the trust, but because they have never had reason to question it. And questioning it would require admitting they might have missed something. And men like Kang Jae-won did not easily admit that. She sat with this knowledge for the rest of the day. She sat with it through the night, in her apartment in Brooklyn, at the kitchen table, with the documents she had photographed on her phone, because she had understood instinctively that physical documents in a building she might not have access to tomorrow were not documents she controlled. She sat with the question that mattered more than the discovery itself. What do I do with this? She could go to the police, but the police and the Kang group had a relationship she had observed in 3 years of filing communications, and it was not the relationship that the law assumed it to be. She could go to the press, but press exposure would not distinguish between Marcus Hale's theft and the broader architecture of the organization, and collateral damage at that scale would reach people she had no interest in harming. She could do nothing, file it away, let it unfold on its own, walk away from this job and this building and this man who had sent her to a basement because of the color of her skin, and simply never look back. She considered this option the longest, and then she thought about the partners in Seoul, men and women she had never met, who had built something across decades, who were being quietly robbed by someone they had never had reason to distrust. People who had done nothing wrong and were losing something real. She thought about what it felt like to be wronged by someone who assumed you would not notice, or would not act, or did not matter enough to matter. She opened her laptop. She drafted 3 sentences in Korean. She had learned enough in 3 years of working beside Mrs. Park to know how to say what needed to be said without saying more than was necessary. There is a problem inside your American operation. The name is Dek Chung Capital. Look carefully. She sent it from an account that could not be traced back to her in any obvious way. Then she closed the laptop, washed her face, and went to sleep. She had done what was right. What happened next was no longer entirely hers to control. But timing, she had always believed, was the one thing a patient person never had to surrender. Kang Jae-won did not sleep well under ordinary circumstances. He had not slept well since he was 19 years old, since the night his sister had called him from a payphone in the rain, and he had been too busy, too important, too consumed by the early architecture of his empire to answer. He had let it ring. He had told himself he would call back in the morning. There had been no morning. Not for her. Since then, sleep came to him in fragments. 2 hours here, 3 hours there, and in the spaces between, he thought. He reviewed. He calculated. And increasingly, in the years since he had inherited the fullness of his grandfather's organization, he watched for signs. His grandfather had been a deeply superstitious man, a man who read meaning into weather, into the behavior of birds, into the colors worn by people who entered rooms where decisions were made. Jae-won had absorbed this the way children absorb the things they are taught before they are old enough to question them. Not as belief, exactly, but as reflex, as a system of pattern recognition dressed in the language of fate. Dark skin during negotiations with the Seoul partners. He had made the decision quickly, the way he made most decisions, efficiently, without extended deliberation, without the luxury of doubt. It had seemed logical within the framework he had always used. A bad omen removed. A risk managed. He had not thought about her face when Mrs. Park delivered the message. He had not allowed himself to. But the anonymous message from Seoul's headquarters arrived on a Thursday morning, and by Friday afternoon his private investigator had placed a single page on his desk with a name at the bottom. Deja Calloway. He read it 3 times. Then he sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling of the office that had belonged to his father before him, and his grandfather before that. And he felt something that powerful men rarely permit themselves to feel, because it has no productive application and cannot be converted into action. He felt ashamed, not of having been wrong about Marcus Hale. He had been wrong about people before, and he had learned to metabolize that kind of wrongness efficiently. What sat differently was the specific geometry of this situation. He had removed her from the room. He had sent her to the place where things go when they are considered useless. And she had been there, in the dark, with the old paper and the humming lights, and she had found the thing that was destroying him from the inside. And she had chosen to protect him anyway. Not for reward. She had asked for nothing. She had not even signed her name. He went to sub-level 2 himself. He did not send Mrs. Park. He did not call ahead. He took the elevator down alone and walked through the archive room door and found her exactly as he might have imagined her, if he had allowed himself to imagine her at all. Composed, precise, working, as though the basement were simply where she had always chosen to be. She heard him enter but did not turn immediately. She finished what she was doing first. That detail registered in him with uncomfortable clarity. "Why did you do it?" he asked. The question came out more direct than he had intended. He was not accustomed to not knowing how to begin. She turned then, and her face was exactly what it had always been in the 3 years he had seen it in corridors and conference rooms. Calm in a way that was not passive. Still in a way that contained something vast and carefully governed. "Because it was right," she said, "not because of you, because of what's right." He waited. He had learned that waiting after someone speaks often produces more truth than asking another question. "I needed this job," she continued, and her voice did not waver, did not perform, did not ask him for anything. "But I have my ethics. Even when the people who should have theirs send me to a basement because of my skin." The sentence was not delivered with anger. It was delivered with the precision of a person who has decided to say a true thing exactly once and will not repeat it. It landed in him like something cold and permanent. He left without answering. Not because he had nothing to say, but because everything he might have said felt, in that moment, insufficient. Marcus Hale was dismissed that same evening. By the following Tuesday, the partners from Seoul had arrived in New York personally, not to negotiate, but to resolve. The structure of Daechung Capital was dismantled. The losses were documented. The damage, while significant, was contained. The organization survived. On a Wednesday morning, 11 days after she had been sent to sub-level 2, a cream-colored envelope appeared on the metal desk in the archive room. Deja opened it slowly. Inside was a single card, heavy stock, gold lettering. Kang Group International V.I.P. Gala, Guest of Honor. She held it for a moment. Then she set it carefully to the side, aligned it with the edge of the desk, and went back to work. She would decide what the invitation meant when she was ready to decide. Not before. The Four Seasons Ballroom had been designed to make people feel that they had arrived somewhere, that the long, difficult work of becoming important was over, and this, finally, this golden room with its chandelier light and its polished floors and its waiters moving like water between bodies, was the reward. Most of the people inside it on that Friday evening believed this completely. They held their glasses and their conversations with the particular ease of those who have never had to question whether they belonged in a room. Deja Calloway had spent her entire life being the person who had to answer that question before she could walk through any door. She answered it now the way she had learned to answer it, not by shrinking, not by performing, but by deciding. She decided she belonged. She walked in. The black dress moved with her, the way clothes move on a person who is not thinking about the clothes. The gold earrings caught the chandelier light. Her hair was down, natural, full, unrestrained, and it was the first time in 3 years that anyone in a Kang group space had seen it that way. She had worn it up every day in that building. Neat, contained, professional. Tonight, she had let it be exactly what it was. People looked. She had expected that. She had not expected how quickly the looking would shift from curiosity to recognition. The particular recognition of people who had heard, through the specific channels through which powerful people hear things, that she was the reason the organization was still standing. She accepted a glass of water from a passing tray and stood near the edge of the room, taking the measure of it the way she always took the measure of spaces before she moved through them. She saw him before he saw her. Kang Jae-won stood at the center of the room, in a black suit with no tie, the white shirt open at the collar, the tattoos climbing his neck visible above the fabric. The dragon, the Korean characters, the marks his grandfather had chosen for him when he was 22, and just beginning to understand the weight of what he had inherited. He was surrounded by partners and associates, and men whose names she recognized from 3 years of filing documents, and he was doing what he always did in rooms like this, projecting a stillness so complete that it functioned as its own kind of authority. Then he turned, and he saw her. What happened in his face in the 2 seconds that followed was something she had never seen there before in 3 years of proximity. It was not guilt. Guilt was too simple for what moved across his features. It was something closer to the expression of a man who has spent a long time being certain about the framework by which he understands the world, and has recently discovered that the framework was built on a fault line. He moved toward her. The room did not stop. Conversations continued. Glasses were raised. Laughter moved through the golden air. But in the particular geometry of that ballroom, something shifted, the way air shifts before weather changes, and the people nearest to them felt it without being able to name it. He stopped 2 feet in front of her, and then Kang Jae-won, the man who had never bowed to anyone outside of his grandfather and the grave of his sister, bowed. Not an incline of the head, not a social gesture. A bow. Formal. Deep. The kind that in his culture costs something real to give, and is understood by everyone who sees it to cost something real. The conversations nearest to them did stop then. A circle of silence expanded outward from where they stood. He straightened. His eyes met hers directly. "I was wrong," he said. His voice was low, but the silence around them made it carry. "You saved what I almost destroyed. Not my business." He paused, and the pause had weight. "My integrity. Thank you, Deja." She looked at him for a long moment. Around them, the golden room waited. "I didn't do it for you," she said. And there was no cruelty in it, no performance of power, no desire to wound. Only the simple and complete truth of a woman who had decided, a long time ago, that she would not allow what others thought of her to determine what she thought of herself. "I did it because I don't become less because of what people decide I am." She held his gaze for 1 more second. Then she turned and walked toward the soul partners, who were already moving in her direction, who already knew her name, who had already been told, in very clear terms, exactly what she had done and exactly what it had cost her to do it. Behind her, Kang Jae-won stood still in the middle of the golden room. He watched her move through it, watched the way the space rearranged itself around her, the way people turned, the way she received the recognition without being altered by it. And he understood, with the slow and total comprehension of a man whose entire system of reading the world had just been permanently revised, that he had almost lost the most significant thing that had ever walked into his organization. Not because of bad luck, because of his own blindness. 2 days later, the offer letter was prepared. Director of American Operations, a title that had never existed before inside the Kang Group structure, created specifically, precisely, for her. She signed it on a Tuesday morning in the same building where she had once been sent to a basement for the color of her skin. She took the elevator to the 34th floor. The doors opened. She walked in. And this time, nobody moved her anywhere. If this story moved something inside you, stop for just a moment and reflect. Have you ever been removed from a room, overlooked, or judged by something as shallow as the way you look, and chose to do the right thing anyway, even for the person who hurt you? Have you ever carried a power that others completely failed to see and had to wait in silence for the world to catch up to what you already knew about yourself? Tell us your story in the comments. We read every single one. And if you believe in stories about dignity, justice, and love that arrives only after truth does, leave your like, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and click Seja Membro to be part of our community and help the channel grow.